Okay, so get this right. Today we're doing something a little different.
Oh, a little different. How so?
Well, we're diving into this whole world of Quranic studies.
Quranic studies, always a fascinating area.
Yeah, but hold on. Before you think we're like about to actually open up the Quran and start, reading,
Right, right.
think of it more like we're exploring all the maps and tools that scholars use to navigate it.
Ah, I see. So it's about the scholarship around the text, the different lenses, the debates, all that.
Exactly. It's like we're going behind the scenes to see how these conversations happen.
Peeking behind the curtain, love it.
We're talking commentaries, linguistic deep dives, you name it. And to help us through all this, you shared some excerpts, right, from Le Coran des Historiens.
Yes. Bit of a mouthful, I know.
It's a mouthful, but it's also a specialized bibliography, which is super cool.
And importantly, it's focused on historical approaches to the Quran.
Okay, so we're choosing a focus, which, you know me, I'm all about history.
Makes sense, given what we're diving into.
But here's what really struck me. The book is organized in a very specific way by surah.
Which is a chapter, for those just joining us.
Thanks for clarifying, but also by individual verse.
It's brilliant for research. Say you're fascinated by a verse, maybe one that sparked tons of debate. This bibliography lets you go directly to the source.
Oh, wow. So it's like a search engine for centuries of scholarship.
And it's meticulously researched. They use a very specific citation method.
Which, okay, I know that might sound like a small thing.
But it speaks volumes about the rigor of the scholarship, believe me.
That's reassuring because following those breadcrumbs, those sources, it's everything.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing. Le Coran des Historiens, it's like the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah, the source material even mentions how this field, Quranic studies, it's booming. New research is constantly coming out.
Which makes it so exciting, but also a little daunting. Like, how do you even keep up?
That's where those online resources you shared come in. They help you stay updated in a field that just doesn't stop.
Okay, so let's talk about those websites because they each have their own vibe, you know?
Totally. Like medi-azayas.org bibliotech. It's amazing for thematic exploration.
Thematic, meaning?
It's organized by theme, like encyclopedias, historical context, even stuff for beginners. Really easy to navigate.
Like curated book displays, you go in for one thing and bam.
Exactly. Now, for something completely different, we have corpuscoranicum.de.
This is the one for the visual learners, right?
You got it. Not only does it have this really cool verse-by-verse bibliography, but they also have actual images of manuscripts,
Wait, really?
some of them dating back centuries.
Wow, that must be amazing to see the calligraphy, the history.
It really brings it to life. Then there's islamic-awareness.org, which is, well, it's a bit different.
Different how?
It's more. Let's just say it's very engaged in the ongoing debates within the field. Aims to provide a counter-narrative to certain perspectives.
Interesting.
And to top it off, they have this incredible collection of early Arabic writing samples, not just from the Quran. Really fascinating stuff.
Okay, and then we have, of course, corpus.quran.com.
Now, this one, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the text, this is it. They've got it all. A concordance, root, dictionary, you know it.
It's like the ultimate toolbox.
Exactly.
So we have Le Coran des Historiens guiding us through the historical side of things and these online resources to keep us current. But I gotta ask,
Cute.
with all of these historical approaches, what kind of insights are we even talking about here? Like, what's the big deal?
That's a great question. And the best way to answer that is to actually look at some specific examples from the bibliography itself.
Let's do it. Hit me with some of those juicy details. What are some of the big debates?
Well, let's start with something seemingly simple. The question of what even makes a chapter. You'd be surprised how much debate there is around the term surah, which simply means chapter in the Quran.
Seriously, it seems like every word, every phrase could spark a whole discussion.
You got it. And those nuances matter. Take, for instance, the phrase kalam Allah, often translated as word of God. It pops up in a bunch of verses, but scholars have been going back and forth for centuries on what kalam in this context actually means.
So is it literally the words or
Or is it something deeper, like a divine message or revelation? That's the debate. And it has major implications for how we understand things like prophecy and even the nature of God.
Okay, you've got my attention. But it's not all about individual words or phrases, though, right?
No way. Scholars also look at the grammatical structures, the verb tenses, the way rhyme and rhythm are used. They're trying to decode the secrets within the language itself.
Now that is a deep dive.
And then there's the historical context. Remember, Le Coran des Historiens is all about those historical approaches.
Right, right. So what kind of insights do we get from that angle?
Think of it like this. Every story comes from a specific time and place, and the Quran is no different.
So scholars are like historical detectives.
Exactly. They're piecing together the social, political, cultural world in which the Quran was revealed.
Which helps us understand the text on a deeper level.
Exactly. We're not just reading words on a page, we're stepping back in time.
I love that.
For instance, there are studies on Bakka, mentioned in the Quran, and its connection to Mecca. And then there's Arafat, that plain near Mecca, and its role in pre-Islamic rituals.
It's like every location, every historical reference becomes a clue.
Exactly. And it's not just about identifying those places or figures, but about understanding the whole world they lived in, their beliefs, their challenges. All of it adds to a richer, deeper understanding of what the Quran is saying.
This is fascinating. I can't wait to see what other examples we uncover as we keep going with this deep dive.
You know, it's funny how even a word like tzedakah can spark so much discussion in this field.
Sada. Okay, for those of us who aren't scholars, remind me what that refers to again.
Right. Tzedakah, it's often translated as charity, right?
Yeah, charity, giving, that whole concept. Pretty central to Islam, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely. But here's where things get interesting. Scholars are using those historical approaches, the ones we were talking about, to dig a little deeper.
Deeper how?
Well, Le Coran des Historiens, it actually points to studies that trace tzedakah back, way back, to its pre-Islamic roots.
So are you saying the meaning was different before Islam came about?
It's not so much a different meaning as like a broader one. See, in pre-Islamic Arabia, tzedakah, it often meant any act that strengthened a covenant, a treaty, you know.
Okay, so not just giving money, but more like...
It could be a gift, sure, but also an oath, a gesture of loyalty. It was about reinforcing bonds.
Wow, so when the Quran uses that term sadaqah, it's got these added layers of meaning.
Exactly. Social responsibility, upholding agreements, it goes beyond just the act of giving.
Okay, see, this is what I love about this deep dive. It's like every little detail has this whole backstory.
And speaking of backstories, that brings us to those historical context pieces in the bibliography.
Right, right. Le Coran des Historiens is supposed to be great for that.
Oh, it doesn't disappoint.
Yeah.
One that really stood out to me was about the term al-Kitab. In the Quran, it's used to talk about Jews and Christians.
Right, like they're recognized as sharing scripture, a lineage.
Exactly. But here's where the historical lens gets really cool.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the bibliography highlights all this research that looks at how al-Kitab, how that term might have been understood in 7th century Arabia, you know, the actual time and place.
So not just the general definition, but how it would have resonated with people back then.
Precisely. And what's so fascinating is some of the research suggests it might have had different connotations than it does today.
How so?
Back then, it wasn't only about religious identity, it also tied into political and social dynamics.
So understanding the whole political climate back then, it changes how you'd read certain verses.
It's not about changing the meaning, but adding to it. Like, the core message is there, but the historical backdrop, that gives it a whole other dimension.
It's like those paintings with the hidden images, you know? You need the right perspective to see them.
Exactly. And that's what makes those entries on intertextuality so fascinating, too.
Right. We're already uncovering all this stuff within the Quran's historical linguistic context.
Imagine adding connections to other religious texts on top of that.
It's like the Quran is having a conversation with all these earlier traditions, right?
Precisely. Drawing on them, responding to them, sometimes even challenging them. And our bibliography, it's like a guidebook to those conversations.
So what are some of the big conversations? Give me an example.
Well, there's a lot of work comparing the story of Prophet Joseph in the Quran with its biblical counterpart, for example.
Oh, wow. That's a story that's always resonated with me in both traditions.
Right. It's a classic.
Yeah.
And scholars, they're looking at everything. The narrative structure, the characters, the themes, even the language used.
Trying to see what's the same, what's different.
And what those similarities and differences tell us about the Quran's own message. It's really fascinating stuff.
It's like each study is a little piece of a giant puzzle.
And as we put those pieces together, we get this much richer, more nuanced view of how the Quran fits into this big tapestry of religious thought.
It makes you realize how dynamic this field really is, constantly evolving.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. It's not about finding one right answer, but about this ongoing journey of exploration.
Speaking of journeys, our source mentioned how fast Quranic studies is growing. I mean, what does that even mean for the field going forward?
That's the question, isn't it? Scholars are trying to figure that out right now.
Any guesses?
Well, some think we're moving towards even more interdisciplinary work,
Yeah.
combining historical analysis with linguistics, anthropology, maybe even psychology.
So it's like breaking down the walls between different fields.
Exactly. And technology is playing a huge role too. We're talking about using data analysis, visualization tools to map out centuries of scholarship. It's pretty amazing.
It's like we're on the verge of something big. But
Yeah.
with all this information, these new approaches, it makes you wonder. It's almost like we're opening one door and it just like leads to a million more, which is cool, but also kind of overwhelming, you know?
I get it. It could definitely feel that way. I think it speaks to the fact that you have to approach this whole field with a sense of curiosity, but also
Mhm.
humility. It's not about finding the one right answer. It's about embracing the fact that there are multiple perspectives.
So more about the journey than the destination.
Exactly. And that's what I love about what we're doing here. We're not just like giving you the SparkNotes version,
Right.
We're giving you a glimpse into the real deal, into how this field actually works, and hopefully giving you the tools to keep exploring on your own.
It's like we're handing you that compass and map, but you get to decide where to go with it.
Exactly. And who knows, you might stumble upon something amazing that no one's ever seen before. That's the beauty of exploration, right?
Totally. But okay, I have to ask. We've been talking about how all these different approaches, the linguistics, the history, how it all adds layers to our understanding of the Quran.
Yeah.
Does it change how people actually read the Quran itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we're not just accumulating knowledge for the sake of it. It's about how that knowledge shapes our relationship with the text itself.
So let's say someone's listening to this, they're intrigued, they pick up a copy of the Quran. Will they see it differently now?
I would hope so. Ideally, they'll come to it with this heightened awareness,
Burdens up.
of the layers of meaning, the nuances. They might notice those linguistic things we talked about,
Yeah.
the historical echoes, the connections to other texts. It's like they have a whole new set of glasses to see it with.
That's a great way to put it. It's like they've unlocked a secret code.
In a way, yes. They're not just passively reading anymore. They're part of this ongoing conversation that's been happening for centuries.
That's really beautiful when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show the journey never really ends, does it?
No, not at all. And on that note, I want to thank you so much for being our guide on this deep dive. This has been incredible.
My pleasure, truly.
Mm.
Always happy to nerd out about this stuff.
You and me both. And who knows, maybe we'll have to do a follow-up sometime because this field, it just doesn't quit.
I'm always up for it.
Awesome. Well, until next time, everyone, thanks for listening.